Wow. Getting the Thunder Badge was super easy. You know, there's like a Diglett tunnel right next to the gym. You could catch a Diglett and just one-shot all the electric type Pokemon, so that was pretty easy. Oh, thanks for joining me today. I would like to take a look at the recent video that Nintendo shared with us regarding Pokémon Legends ZA. For those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. My name is Jerrel. I'm a full-time commercial games developer, but I enjoy just hanging out with you guys here at the channel where we can talk games and have a laugh. So in this video, I want to examine what I see in Legends ZA as a game developer. I want to point out the improvements that I see over Scarlet and Violet. I know that many people are disappointed with the direction that the Pokemon games are going recently in terms of the quality of the products, and so I hope to communicate with you in a way that is clear that we can all understand. So if I were to say that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are the equivalent of just a standard, typical Pokeball, I would say that Legends ZA is the equivalent of a luxury ball. It's much nicer, significantly improved, and it just looks great. So many people feel betrayed, they feel hurt by the modern Pokemon games because they feel like Game Freak is not putting in enough effort, and people feel betrayed and hurt by that. And I really strongly believe that with Pokemon Legends ZA, this is the point where the relationship between Pokemon and its fans start to heal. I don't want to drag on with this intro, and I do want to be quick about it. So with all of those details out of the way, let's go ahead and dive on into the trailer. So right off the bat, we start strong with this montage of battle elements, which is very exciting. This sort of thing gets me hyped as a fan to see all of that action occurring. Now, I'm going to discuss some technical terms here, and right off the bat, what I want to explain is that Scarlet and Violet use very modern rendering techniques. There are parts of a game's rendering program called a shader. Every piece of geometry in the game uses a shader, which is basically a program that tells the game renderer how something should be rendered in-game, how it should be drawn, how it should look. The more complex a shader is, the more advanced it is. It can look more realistic, it could look more interesting. It doesn't necessarily mean more realistic, but it means it performs more calculations, whether that is with in-game lighting or reacting to the atmosphere or reflections. That means that if a shader can do all of those things, then a character or a tree or a building can look more complicated. But every game has a rendering budget. You can only spend so much. Everything in the game has a rendering cost. So all of these things here cost something to render, not in terms of financial money, but your rendering budget in the game. And if things cost too much, then the game does not run well. The frame rate drops, which is what we see in Scarlet and Violet. Now, with that explanation out of the way, Scarlet and Violet does not use its rendering budget well. Not only are things drawn very expensive to render, but they also have very poor expression. Far more important than realism is expression. What are we saying visually? What are we trying to communicate? And how are we saying it? With that explanation, I want to say that what we see in Legends ZA, we see renders, the shaders that are being used to render the in-game graphics are simpler. They are technically inferior. They are technically worse. But being technically worse does not mean that the graphics are worse, because what we actually like, what our eyes like, and what our minds like is expression. So even though the technology itself is simpler and more basic, it also means that the game can run better. And in general, when artists are constrained to some sort of limitation, they tend to be more creative and expressive, and it generally results in better art because the artists have to be more thoughtful and well considered in what they are expressing. What I'm seeing in this trailer is expression of visual design that is significantly more considered. It's more thought out than Scarlet and Violet. So I'm seeing that not only as an artist, but as a game developer. The graphics on the Pokemon models, I'm noticing the shaders are significantly simpler, but that doesn't actually mean that they're visually less attractive. I personally really enjoy this. I can tell right off the bat, these are doing far less calculations in terms of lighting and shadows, but it also means that the rendering budget for the Pokemon 3D models is significantly lower than Scarlet and Violet. We are going to see this game run at a significantly better frame rate. Something I've noticed throughout this trailer as well, they're depicting a lot of lens flare. So in previous videos, I've mentioned something called volumetric lighting. It is simply a modern rendering technique that allows games to look like they are expressing a sense of atmosphere. They can reflect a sense of density or particles or moisture in the atmosphere, but that modern rendering technique is very expensive. And so when you are in an environment where you don't have much rendering budget, you can sort of fake volumetric lighting with distance fog, which is something very basic. We've had it for decades. It was not used well at all in Scarlet and Violet, but I'm seeing it is used extremely well. Now, when you combine distance fog, which just sort of checks how far something is from the viewing camera, and then it makes it look like there's fog in front of it, you can convey a sense of atmosphere and density. There are bad ways to use it, and there are good ways to use it. This is a situation where I'm seeing that they've spent some time considering it and fine-tuning it, and they are using distance fog extremely well. So they are using a rendering technique that does not have a high performance cost, and they are combining that with lens flares. Lens flares activate when a bright light source is present in the scene, for example, the sun here. And you can see as the character goes in front of the lens flare, they can sort of occlude it a bit. Now, this is something I mentioned in a video I made, I think 2 years ago, and that with Scarlet and Violet, they combine lens flares with bloom. Bloom is another rendering technique. It is generally a filter that is applied after the scene has been rendered. Then we process bloom. Bloom adds a halo between light and dark areas. For example, you have this light area behind the mountains. Bloom adds a halo and it sort of blurs that. Not only does it make it look more realistic, because that's how our eyes see things, it's also very pleasant. It makes things look like they have a sense of depth. It can fake a sense of blurring into the atmosphere, but it's just very pleasant to look at. It makes games look visually coherent. But it can be quite expensive, and especially on the Switch, bloom is kind of expensive to process. It costs, your frame rate's going to drop maybe 5 to 10 frames a second based on your rendering resolution. That's why some games actually run a little bit better in handheld mode, is that certain processes are less expensive when you have smaller rendering resolution. Something I recommended in a video where I analyzed Scarlet and Violet is from a developer standpoint. In general, gamers won't understand what I'm talking about here, but if you're a developer out there, I think you know what I mean. And that is, you can lower the internal rendering resolution of your bloom processing. Your bloom processing does not need to be rendered at the same resolution as the game itself. If you do that, it's going to cost you a significant amount. What I've seen the developers do here is they've reduced the internal rendering resolution on bloom processing, and I can see that flickering here. This is not necessarily something that is bad. It doesn't look bad to me. It is something that in general people would not notice or complain about, and as developers, that is something we have to do. We have to find where we can optimize things and reduce the quality of things in a way that does not negatively impact the product, so that we can balance out our performance with our fidelity and our expression. I suspect that the developers have taken this philosophy into consideration, and that they have also applied this to other post-screen shaders or filters that are applied to allow the game to still look very good, but also to run better. these are things that you learn as a developer over time. And it just looks great when something occludes that gets in front of the light source and you can see it sort of, the lens flare flickers a little bit. Really fantastic. The shadows here look significantly better. I believe that these are running at a lower resolution than in Scarlet and Violet, but they are using a different technique that actually smoothens out the edges so much more than in Scarlet and Violet, and it's so pleasant to look at. It's much nicer. You can still see some flickering there, but it's not really a big deal. This is a scene where we can see that the pixel density drops. Now, something our games can do is we can tell when a scene is causing the frame rate to drop. When I say a scene, I mean that whatever content is visible in the view of the camera, whatever the camera is viewing, if the rendering budget gets too high, then we can dynamically reduce the resolution. I can see the pixel density is dropping here, so the resolution has dropped, but again, it's one of those considerations you have to make on the Switch. Something I noticed about the shaders here, so again, we are using simpler shaders, right? There's less light calculation, there's less shadow calculation, there are no reflections that I'm seeing calculated here, but something the shader does, which is just more expressive, is it uses rim lighting here. Now, this isn't necessarily coming from a light source. That's one way to do it, but I believe a shader is performing a calculation to add a bit of rim there, and that is rim lighting. In photography, that's something you do is you place light behind a model. Photography is one of my previous careers. It's something I enjoy going back to once in a while, but having a strong understanding of photography allows you to make visually expressive visuals and graphics in video games. You can see the rim lighting here along with the character. If we did not have that, these graphics would look significantly more bland, and then you would have to brute force it and rely on modern lighting techniques to try to make it look interesting. What we want is for there to be dynamic between the dark and the light areas. I say this not only as a game developer, but as an artist in general and as a photographer, is you need to make your scene look interesting with dynamic. And they've done that here very well. There's a softness between the darker areas and the lighter areas here in the shader that I think is just so expressive, and it's really pleasant to look at. This just looks much more expressive and pleasant. So I really enjoy that rim lighting there. You can see that it really makes the characters pop. And after I pointed that out, try and keep an eye out on the scene, and we'll see if NPCs also have that, and if less important character models have that, because there would be a little bit of a performance cost, but there wouldn't be much. But let's go ahead and see what is next here. These really fantastic characters can sort of emit a self halo on their models to help them stand out here, which is really nice. And when I say model, I don't mean like a Victoria's Secret situation. The character models, a model is an asset in a video game that represents the graphics of an object or a character or an entity. All right, let's have a look here. Oh, I've noticed here, I quite like the expressiveness of the clothes. We have a little bit of physics simulation on the clothes there, not too much. You need just enough, because physics simulation, again, has a cost. It's a little bit expensive. You need just enough to convey a sense of movement and life. Well, animation is to bring life to something. If you have a look at the grass here, the grass itself is significantly more basic in terms of its wind simulation. It is simulating a sense of wind. You need to understand, as a developer, you are not actually creating the thing that you are expressing. You are creating something to elicit that memory or response or feeling from the audience. So you are eliciting the sense of wind blowing through the grass. You are not actually creating wind in the grass. And people that are early in their development careers don't understand that, and they get stuck in a trap thinking that they are actually creating something. You will get much farther in your career as a game developer in terms of your skills and your understanding if you learn that early on, is you are creating the representation of something and you are expressing something. I'm seeing here again a much stronger understanding of creating games in a 3D space. This was something that really disappointed me with Sword and Shield, was that, again, I don't want to say anything negative. I'm not here to belittle the developers, but the team that developed Sword and Shield had a very little understanding of working in a 3D space using verticality to break up your visual line, which is quite boring. Your horizon line is very boring, and you need to break that up with visual elements, with not just shapes, but with color We can see good use of distance fog here as we recede into the background. It looks like this is fading into the atmosphere. It looks like it's fading into the color of the sky. Very well considered and well implemented. And we even see that in the buildings as well. It gives it a look of depth, which is something that Scarlet and Violet, they improved the graphics considerably. There's a number of things that they improved with Scarlet and Violet, but that was a complicated project. That was tough to work with. Here we have Lumio City. Something I do like, again, I don't have the volume playing here, but I will put the link to this in the description. Give it a listen. They have done a reorchestrated arrangement of the battle theme, but now it's playing as more relaxed music. This battle theme from X and Y is one of my favorite in the entire series, so hearing it in this rearranged form is just really fantastic. I actually want to point out just these visual motifs on this Pokemon guy here. To me, this shows very strong consideration for the internal logic of the game here. Let's go ahead and just have a look at their use of their lens flare here, again, coming off the sun. I can tell, again, that they've lowered the resolution because there's a little bit of shimmer on that, but that's a very good thing because it means the game can run better. Let's see here. The animations on the characters are very expressive. You see the rim lighting there. This is a different form of rim lighting. It's not exactly the same as what we saw on the player character. It looks like a more basic, it doesn't have that harshness, which is interesting. So maybe it depends on the environment that they are in, but you can see the bloom. Oh, I'm in front of that here. You can see this is a very strong example of bloom, where there's a halo between the light and the dark pixels, and that it makes it look good. It just makes it look good. Let's see here. And again, compared to Scarlet and Violet, the renderers used for basically everything, the buildings, the objects, they are no longer using physically based shaders. I've explained this in previous videos. A physically based shader is kind of the industry standard. It's the modern shader we use, sort of the default one when we want things to look realistic. We want to calculate a lot of lighting and reflections, but it's quite expensive on hardware like the Switch. These are using significantly simpler shaders, but you can still make your visuals look expressive and coherent, and they are, again, have a much lower rendering cost. So this game will run significantly better than Scarlet and Violet. We will not see the performance issues that Scarlet and Violet had. Again, they're doing this little trick here because they know that the halo looks good. It creates a sense of volumetric lighting, even though there isn't. It looks good. You have the Emolga occlude that, the Dedenne over here sort of cheering on his little buddy. And having that lens flare there, it makes the scene really pop, really visual. It's good use of bloom here. Just sort of, whoa, that is bright, man. Really fantastic. The clouds, simple. I believe these are much simpler than the ones used in Scarlet and Violet, and that's all you need. They are using their rendering budget with much more consideration. Again, the trees themselves, they appear to have a much more primitive type of wind simulation than in Scarlet and Violet, which means that the trees themselves are easier to render, and they do look much better. You look at the textures here, whether or not the textures are low resolution or not, they're visually more coherent. But you can see the trees don't have the rim lighting that the characters have. The environment does not have the rim lighting, and that is to make sure that the characters pop. They look really good. But see, this character model doesn't have that same kind of visual pop. So I'm wondering if it's only in certain situations. You can see that rim processing here and on the Vaporeon. Malamar's my dude. I got to pause to appreciate Malamar having that superpower with Contrary. You guys know where it's at. You guys know what I'm talking about. You know where it's at. The shader used for water is significantly more basic than the one used in Scarlet and Violet. Unfortunately, Scarlet and Violet had water was very prominent, and the shader used for the water was very expensive in terms of the rendering cost. It was everywhere. This is way more basic, so technically it's worse. Technically the graphics are worse, but it's only in terms of technology. The technology used for this is more basic. The implementation, the visual expression, the consideration that goes into it makes the graphics better. And again, it's not going to have the performance issues that Scarlet and Violet had. Like, you could not get away from water in Scarlet and Violet. It is in these wild areas where I notice the resolution actually returns to full 1080, whereas in town, when there's a lot of NPCs around, to me that kind of tells me that maybe the NPCs are a little bit expensive to render. But this is a scene, I can tell this has been recorded off of Switch hardware, I know for a fact. This is running in 1080. I'm not seeing any anti-aliasing. But I can tell this is in 1080. Anti-aliasing or aliasing does have its own performance cost. But to me, this looks great. This is visually coherent. The colors fit together much better than they did in Scarlet and Violet. The visual elements just pop. They know how to break the visual line. If these rocks were, if these geologic features were not here, if these trees were not here, you would have a very flat visual line. This is a design philosophy I call breaking the line. Having that river cut through, or having the stream cut through at an angle like that, having the bushes placed in just the right areas here breaks the visual line, and it makes it look interesting. If those were not there, if they were placed here instead, you would see a line, and it would be very dull to look at. I believe that the artists here have significantly more design consideration. I like the UI elements here. Very clean, very concise. It's easy to look at. Great use of simulated atmospheric lighting. The UI is quite clear to me. It's easy to understand. This is fantastic. We'll just go through here. This delicious little friend here. I enjoy looking at these small details. Something about food, just background food in games. I'm always just fascinated by it. I like to see what sort of food they're sticking in the background. I don't know. It's one of the design elements as a gamer, I always paid way too much attention to it. We are saving on our usage of RAM, our memory budget, by tiling in a way that, if you were to compare it to like more advanced, PlayStation 5, Xbox games, you would say, oh, that looks basic, but it is coherent. It is the visual language, it's the internal logic, it's coherent. Everything shares this. There's a internal logic that we get adjusted to. It's like learning a new language. We look at it, we accept this is normal in this environment, we contextualize it, and we accept, all right, this is normal. That allows us to believe that. But if you were to compare that, to a PS5 game, you could complain about it and say it just doesn't look good. But in this situation, I believe this was the right call to make, because it means that this only takes up a very small space in memory. It frees up the memory for things that are more important. You need to decide as a developer, is it important to have a totally unique looking window on every single window? And do you want to waste your memory budget on that? How important is it? In this case, it is the least important part of this game, and I'm glad that they've done that, because it means that they can spend their memory budget on many other things. Who here hacked a Floette into their X and Y game because they wanted Eternal Floette? Go ahead and just let me know. Up close, the resolution on those bushes actually looks quite good. That's interesting. Yeah, the resolution on the bushes look quite good. Yeah, that's all right. This is simple geometry, but they've implemented very well. This is, as a developer, this is significantly more considered in terms of optimized visuals and expression over Scarlet and Violet. This is something that bothers me a little bit, is letting your children teleport up onto the rooftop and not having railing there. I believe in not being a helicopter when you're parenting and raising kids, but this is a situation where, look, an 8 or a 9-year-old can teleport up onto this roof, right? No railing. Death Star didn't have the railing, and we saw what happened there. This is so neat. It's so interesting, and to me it tells me that they understand verticality. They've considered that we will be viewing this environment from ground floor and the roofs as well. I think that this is going to be such an interesting experience. It's visually already tells me they've put way more work into this to make it look interesting to the player. They've considered the player experience here. You can see the reduction halo. So we have strong bloom, that haloing effect, strong bloom between the background of the mountains, the sky and the mountains there. And then as we fade to nighttime, that bloom effect is reduced and you see that harsh edge. So there's just another clear example of bloom. We have the nice stars in the night sky. You'd be shocked at how much of a memory cost a good skybox can have, because these need to be high definition. The stars need to be sharp. If you don't implement it in a specialized way with a very creative solution, this actually costs way more than you think in terms of memory. It's just funny. This is looking real serious here, having this green aura. So you have that self-casting rim shader there. We do see a sense of normal mapping. Normal mapping, a normal map is, some people think of it as a bump map. It is a part of the material. It is an image file that is part of the texture. That, oh, look at the, yeah, cool. That adds bumpiness. It adds a sense of texture to it. They're just, I can see that more consideration has gone into it in this game. It looked to me in Scarlet and Violet they were using procedurally generated normal maps, and they were just using a detail map to layer it on. But I'm not seeing that here. To me, it looks like this was more bespoke. They spent more time manually creating the visual assets here, so I'm very excited to see that. I actually prefer these character designs over the ones in Scarlet and Violet. So this is, I believe this is a situation at nighttime. Seto Kaiba invites the strongest duelists from all over the world, and then he traps you in the city and you have to fight for points, I think. This is cool. This is like a Vivillon sort of a situation, these leggings. I'm not sure if that's a Vivillon thing. Did anyone ever get all the Vivillon out there? I think you guys know what I'm talking about. If anyone ever needed the one from Australia, I think it's the river one. It's kind of like a brown and blue and white. Cool. We got some cool dudes here. I think, I mean, I'm not here to do a content breakdown, but I think we saw some regional variants. I'm sure some people out there have analyzed that. I'm just going to take a look at the light sources here as a developer. I just want to look at this. We have grass that does not cast shadows, which is very good. If you let your grass cast shadows, it's going to be significantly more expensive on the budget. It looks like that is casting a shadow, this bush here. Let's see here. What else can we see? Ah, that was very intense look, my friend. I do hope that they increase the texture resolution on the tiles of, you know, this sort of ground here. To me as a player, I do notice those things. To me, it breaks the illusion a little bit, and that's only because everything else looks so good. So I will complain. I would personally recommend, not as a player, but as a consultant or a developer, I would personally recommend making room. I would find some space in the memory budget, and I would say, find out where you can clear up some budget and make this higher resolution, because I can see artifacting, I can see pixelation, and as a player it takes me out of the experience a little bit, and that's only because everything else looks so good. I think the characters look great and expressive and sharp. The Pokemon look great, the foliage is well implemented, the buildings look fine. The pixel density on this is noticeably lower, and so that is something, not just as a gamer, as a developer and consultant, I would say make room in your budget and just make this a higher resolution. As a gamer, it is negatively impacting the experience for me a little bit, but for other people it may not bother them. But I would personally prefer this to be higher pixel resolution, because it would give the game a visually more coherent look. Even if you don't actively understand that, you do subconsciously notice that, and it does affect the overall experience. Here, that's not so much of a problem. It's not an issue here. Like, this looks fine to me, but when you see the particle effects, they're all sharp and crisp. These animations here, these particle effects are frame by frame animation. Because they are so sharp, if you have a look at the sharpness, high pixel densities, or high resolution, these cost something. They have a high rendering budget. Or not rendering, a high memory budget. They're using up RAM. They're stored in RAM, they're high resolution, and that's probably what the developers have prioritized here. Me personally, I would see where I could maybe reduce the resolution on that a little bit, because it's so momentary and fast that we don't see it for that long. I might prioritize the environments just a bit more, because the particle effects move so fast. So were I a developer, that's where I would make room in the budget. See, like, this really takes me out right now as a developer, is seeing the low pixel density there. It may not matter to some people, but if that were high resolution on the ground, this would look great to me. I just really like the sharpness of the character when the game's running at real resolution. They're expressive. They are coherent with the environments, which is a huge problem that Scarlet and Violet had. Using physically based shaders to calculate lighting and reflections and all this, it was not visually coherent. Technically, it was better because technically it was more advanced. Just because something is technically better and more realistic does not actually make it visually better. I really like that your ranking system goes from Z to A or Z to A if you use the alphabet in such a manner. Big zipper, my guy. Very big zipper. I really like that these character designs are just so much simpler and more expressive in all the NPCs. They have a more concise and focused look than the ones in Scarlet and Violet. They've really considered this. What I would strongly recommend, I mean, this isn't necessarily something that general gamers would understand, but I would strongly recommend in the 3D models possibly adjusting the vertex color, the color of the vertices. You can have like a darker vertex color here and then a lighter vertex color here. And what that would actually achieve is that it doesn't cost anything. It's free, but it makes the foliage look brighter up top, and naturally it would be brighter up top because that is where light sources come from. It doesn't necessarily make it more realistic, but it does make it look more expressive. So in your modeling program, you adjust the vertex color. You just select your vertex and you can change that. So, you know, if this was like a, you know, a gray, you can make that white, you know, 100%, and you can add, you know, gradients to the vertices in between. But if you try that, if you're a developer that, you know, you're creating your own foliage or your own models, try that. And it just makes it more expressive and interesting to use. And it makes it more dynamic because what I'm seeing here is a harshness. The harshness on this here, it does not really blend well with the mountains. I'm not saying this as a gamer. I know I've seen people complain in my videos and say, oh, this guy can't be happy with anything. I'm a games developer, not just a gamer. So I need to make sure that what we are doing as developers is as good as it can be. You guys can be free to complain all you want, and you should because you're the gamer. We are all gamers, and you should complain if something just doesn't feel right to you so that we can hear you. But for me, it's important that I take that next step further to help people understand what they can do to make their games better. I would personally do that. The foliage does fall a little bit flat, but if you have a look here, so you can achieve that sort of look. This, you know, maybe, I think this is baked in. This is just, that's how the texture is drawn, but you can adjust the vertices color. It doesn't cost anything in terms of performance, and you can give it, it does actually make it look more realistic, but that's not why it looks better. It makes it look better because it's more expressive visually. And it conveys a sense that light is coming from above, and it's illuminating this part of the graphic asset while occluding the bottom part. It just looks good. Give it a try. The indoor areas look fine. It's a little desaturated in here, which is quite nice. It gives us this like sort of you know, antique old feeling to it, which is appropriate for that scene. This is great. There's that's the Zygarde form that I like. Guys, I'm not a stats hound, right? I like this form of Zygarde because he's a doggy. And I like doggies. So there we go. This is the Zygarde form I go with. You can be a stats hound if you want. I'm going for the doggo. So I'm not in contact with anyone from the development team. I don't know anyone in Game Freak. But if I could say anything to them, it would be Subarashi. This is wonderful, fantastic. I don't normally pick up games on launch day because I'm so busy with my own work. I'm finishing up development on my own games right now, and I'll be launching them in a couple months. But this is a game that I will be picking up on launch day, and that's only because after seeing this trailer and the launch trailer, I have seen how much effort Game Freak has put in to improve their products. I see a lot of people that are upset about the quality of Game Freak products, and they're saying, oh, they're not putting in enough effort, especially with Scarlet and Violet. But what I'm seeing here is they are putting in the effort. They are making huge improvements over Scarlet and Violet, and I'm fairly confident in telling you that we won't see the visual issues, we won't see the performance issues of Scarlet and Violet, and I will be picking this up because they've put in the effort to improve their end product. This looks so cool to me, so I will be playing this on launch day. If you want to check out my other videos of a similar topic where I analyze the trailers, I'll put something on screen. I'll put the links in the description. All right. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today. Be well. Remember, everybody, life is an adventure, so get out there and live.